This is the EliteMini TH50, another one of Minisforum's many mini PCs. This model was made available back in February this year with the Intel 11th Gen i5. Now that's all good timing because the newest 12th Gen mobile processors were also launched in February this year. And as we know, with the introduction of efficiency and performance cores in the current gen, it quite literally blows the 11th Gen Intel out of the water. But that's not to say that the TH50 is a terrible release. The silver lining is that this i5 in particular is rocking Intel's full-fat Xe graphics with 96 execution units, not the soft-core 80 found in the 1135 G7 mobile chip. I'm going to run through some benches, test it as a Plex server, thermals, noise, and run some games on it. So we'll see if the TH50 is worth the money. Let's get into it. Just showing you what you get in the box quickly. You've got a manual, a 60cm HDMI cable, a bracket for installing two 2.5-inch drives, a 65-watt USB-C power brick, a VESA mount bracket, and of course the unit itself. I think the packaging itself is presented nicely and not cheap and generic feeling like some mini PCs you find off AliExpress. Now onto the unit itself. It is square in shape. I'll put its dimensions and weight up on screen. I'm not offended by the look of it, but I can understand if you find the design below average. The top and bottom of the unit is made of plastic. On the top you have the Minisforum logo, a grill cutout, a large fan can be seen just underneath. On the bottom you get 4 rubber feet. You have 2 slots for the VESA mounting. To do that you install the VESA plate at the back of the monitor and then line up those 2 slots to secure it. Great for those who find this unit ugly. You've also got 4 Phillip head screws which we'll remove once we have a look at the internals. But before that, the sides are finished in a brushed metal which is cool to the touch and doesn't seem to grab fingerprints. You have 2 open vents on opposing sides with a clear CMOS button. On the front you get a clicky power button, microphone and headphone jack, 2 USB 3.0 ports and a Thunderbolt 4 port. That Thunder 4 port I have tested and can run external graphics card too, but I won't show in this video as I want to save that for a separate comparison video. Over on the rear you get 2 USB 2.0 ports, 2 more USB 3.0 ports, 2 2.5 gigabit LAN ports, a display port supporting 8K 60Hz, and a HDMI port supporting 4K 60Hz, a Kensington lock, and a USB-C port for the power brick. So popping off the bottom of this unit has a 256GB Phison 2280 size M.2 NVMe drive installed. Beneath that we have a MediaTek branded M.2 Wi-Fi 6E and Bluetooth 5.2 combo card. Obviously got your CMOS battery here. There are 4 screws if you want to fully disassemble it to reveal the other side with the heatsink and fan, which I won't do as this isn't supposed to be a full teardown. And this unit in particular there isn't much reason to. There are also 2 SATA slots for the SATA and power combo cables that came with the 2.5-inch drive mounting bracket. And you see it on the other side of the bottom plastic cover, the spot where you mount those drives. Do keep in mind there is a max thickness of 7mm, which will be fine for majority of SSDs. Now let's talk about specs before we get too lost in the moment. The EliteMini TH50 has an Intel Core i5 11320H which rocks 4 cores and 8 threads, and was released in the second quarter of 2021 on the 10nm process. It has a base frequency of 3.2 GHz and turbos up to 4.5 GHz. This CPU also has an Intel Xe graphics, 96 execution units, which is also found in the i7 11th Gen chips. It's a step up from the 80 execution units found in the more popular 1135 G7 i5s, and an even bigger leap forward from the 11400H UHD graphics, though that does have 6 cores, so it has its own place in the stack. This unit has soldered on 16GB LPDDR4 memory running at 3200 MHz, which is enough for this system in my opinion, but will be disappointing for those who need more. Storage on the unit as mentioned is 256GB, but can also be purchased with 512GB, and of course you can put in your own drive if you wish. Also just letting you know, I've dived into the BIOS and it's relatively locked down so that you are locked in at a 35W TDP. Firstly, let's do some benchmarks. Cinebench R20, we've got a single core score of 548 and a multi-core score of 2322. For a comparison point, that is roughly the same performance as a Core i5 9400 desktop CPU, which is actually not quite bad, considering that it is a 6-core CPU. 4 cores is good enough for budget systems, but if experience is anything to go by, probably not enough to have a positive experience running virtual machines, for example. Now onto Geekbench, we've got a single core score of 1343 and a multi-core score of 5357. Results don't reveal anything different to what we saw in the Cinebench score, but it does get a similar result to the 6-core Ryzen 5 5600H CPU. Overall, CPU performance is quite decent for a quad-core. Before we move on, I've run Crystal Disk Mark to get an idea of the speed of the NVMe drive inside. Sequential read and write speeds are average and in line with Gen 3 speeds. It is a DRAM-less drive, so we will have all the shortfalls that come with that. I also want to mention the Ryzen E13T controller is the same you'll find in the Crucial P2 NVMe drive, which is another low-cost drive. Most people will find this drive adequate in performance. Alright, on to gaming now. World War Z 720p low settings, I got a minimum FPS of 56 and an average of 70. I did have to run the benchmark twice. The first one had a bit of choppiness at the start with a minimum of 30 FPS, which I can't explain, but of course the second run is what you should expect. Very playable game. Next one I've tested is a not so recent title, but it's a really amazing game that I enjoyed playing. Middle-earth Shadow of War from 2017, 720p low settings as well with an average of 57 frames per second. Occasionally it did drop down into single digits, but I think by now you would have come to understand that gaming on this unit isn't going to be a perfect experience, just a playable one. CSGO now, I've run FPS benchmark at 720p medium settings and got an FPS in the low hundreds. I did initially try it at 1080p but was getting around 40s to 50s, which for a competitive shooter like this I think is a bit low, but that depends on the refresh rate of the monitor as well. Please note that FPS does drop pretty low in very demanding smoke sequences, down to 22 FPS in my case. Next game, Cyberpunk 2077, 720p low settings. Average of 41 and a low of 20. Not great, but technically playable. Whilst you could drop it even lower to 600p if you wanted those extra frames, but I think that might be trying a little bit too hard. Last game I tested, the new Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2, 720p on basic settings, and I got an average of 45 and a low of 30 frames per second. That is playable, but personally I prefer high frames for a game like this. If you run it at 720p with FSR on, you can hit 65 frames per second average, but it runs like render resolution of 432p. In other words, the game absolutely looks like trash. So that's your call on what you prefer. Overall, it is satisfactory for 720p gaming and can do 1080p if you're playing a much older title. I haven't done a specific game stream test via Parsec or a cloud gaming service like GeForce Now, but I can tell you that it's going to handle those no problem. Now onto Plex transcoding. I've got 3 HEVC copies of Tenet, 4K at 28.4 megabit, 4K at 4.2 megabit, and 1080p at 3.5 megabit. To eliminate any network bottlenecks, I'm going to use Ethernet on this machine. As expected, neither 4K stream could escape buffering with HDR tone mapping turned on. With it turned off, no problem running multiple 4K streams. However, with HDR copies of movies, it's not the best experience. Just to reiterate, the action sequences in this movie are phenomenal. But as with all Christopher Nolan movies, you gotta have superhuman ears to hear dialogue over the soundtrack. This scene in particular suffers from that problem, but it does provide a good sense of color desaturation and loss of brightness with HDR tone mapping turned off. Keep to the SDR content is my advice. So lastly, let's talk about thermals, noise, and power draw. Extremely quiet at idle, couldn't detect any sound above the ambient in my room. All I can hear is a light whir of the fan from an arm's length away. At full load with Cinebench and Firmac running at the same time, it's still not very loud at all and still at ambient sound levels. The fan did ramp up and down, which can bother some people. If it were me, I would keep this PC mounted behind my monitor so I probably wouldn't hear it. Power draw, 10 watts at idle and about 53 at full load, which is quite low power. This also explains temps could only max out at 70 degrees Celsius in my use, which is more like a spike. In games, I was hovering around 60 degrees. So overall, this PC is quite efficient. Okay, so that was a Minisforum EliteMini TH50. Now onto its pricing, it currently goes for $399 US on the Minisforum website for the 16GB RAM and 256GB SSD option. I bought mine for $389 a few months ago when I got a special deal. Yes, that's right, a few months ago. I've actually been using this unit as a dedicated Plex server for a few months, but it suffered from stability issues and crashed more often than I liked, so I RMA'd it and they sent me this new unit. I'm happy to report that I haven't had any stability issues with this new unit, and Minisforum were a bit slow to send out a replacement and also responding to my emails at times, but otherwise I never felt they wouldn't follow through with the warranty process, but it was pretty expensive for me to send the unit from Australia back to China. Now at its current price of $399 US, I don't think it's a bad choice. From an integrated graphics perspective, it performs above average and there isn't much competition from that standpoint. However, being 11th gen and only a quad core does hinder its overall CPU performance, and if that is your focus, then you're better off putting down a bit more money for a 12th gen Intel i5 or i7. But be aware that at least when comparing the 1240 or 50p i5s to the 1260 or 70p i7s, only the 12th gen i7 has a 96 execution unit Xe graphics, meaning that the 11320H may actually perform better on games than the 12th gen i5s, and understandably 12th gen i7 is going to be targeting a person with a different budget. The AMD alternative is a PC with the 5900HX, which has Vega-based integrated graphics that are meant to be comparable in performance to the Xe graphics, but being an 8-core and 16-thread processor with generally better IPC, it does come in around $140 more expensive, so it does move into a different price bracket once again. The TH50 also suits as a home media server. It's quiet and efficient enough, and Intel QuickSync means it will do fine with 4K transcoding as long as it's only SDR. The 2.5-inch slot is also handy in that sense, but you will be limited to mostly SSDs, which, as you know, can get pricey if you go in high capacity. Also, a tip I have about purchasing PCs from Minisforum: try googling coupon codes before making a purchase. That's how I was able to get $50 off months ago to bring it to even lower than its current price. I've got a Minisforum mini PC on the way, the UM690, which has the AMD 6900HX with the new RDNA 2 graphics, and is touted to be the best integrated graphics on the market, so I'll be really excited to compare the two when it gets in. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss it. Until then, bye bye.